There are two functions, special ones, that we want to talk about relative to the imperfect form, and those are the Jussive and the Cohortative. And this is a further category, and we already kind of see a special, deeper sense, the flexibility of the imperfect to have all the modal senses to it. But the Jussive and Cohortative are very specific kinds of sense that go with it. It really refers to the speaker's desire or wish or command. So these sort of focus on a volitional sort of aspect or function for the imperfect. And when it comes to the Jussive sense, sometimes it comes from an unmarked imperfect verb, so it's very similar to the modalities that we already spoke of. But we'll get to it in just a minute, but there's also marked forms. So here in Genesis chapter 16, we have an unmarked, what appears to be a Jussive form. Sarah says to her husband, Yishpot Hashem beini uvenecha. So here's the imperfect verb from Shin Pei Tate, to judge. And so in this case we have, if we just had that word, we would say, he will judge. And the Lord is the subject. The Lord will judge. The Lord will judge between me and between you. However, because of how she's talking, I think it's probably right. This is we should talk about the Jussive here. Particularly a good clue is whenever the speaker is talking about a god or a king, almost always there's circumlocution in our talk. And so in that case, we want to go to a Jussive sense. So here, we use the signal words either may or let, usually to signal the Jussive tone here. May the Lord judge between me and between you, or let the Lord judge between me and between you. And so what we have then is the Jussive focuses on this volitional sense of the second and third person subjects, and the Cohortative, this volitional sense with first person. So this example is a Jussive in the third person. May the Lord judge. Now let's look at another example of a second person Jussive form of the imperfect, unmarked Jussive. So it's just the Jussive sense. Lema'an tizkari vavosht. And there you'll notice we have in the pronunciation of vavosht. This is the only case where when we have two shavas in a row, they're both silent as at the end of a word like that. So here we have, in order that, and this is, you may remember, I'm going to just put the Jussive sense right onto it, you may remember and be ashamed. Now what happens is, in the case of a vav consecutive perfect, what we have here then is it follows the sense of the imperfect that's before it, because it's consecutive in its sense. So here if we take the word tizkari, may you remember and may you be ashamed, is sort of the sense that we get from that. So I would consider this an example of an unmarked but a Jussive sense imperfect verb, has that volitional sense to it. So there's also a couple of different ways that Jussives can be marked. One is with the term na. Na can be put with an imperfect form, and that marks it as a very intentionally Jussive. So here is a term, yizkar na. So for parsing, if we just had yizkar, I'd put kal imperfect 3ms. However, because of the Jussive marker, here I would do kal Jussive 3ms, understanding that Jussive is an explicit marker. Now for the unmarked Jussives, I would just put imperfect because it's a matter of interpretation. But here with the marked Jussive, I would take it as a Jussive. So here we have then, may he remember, or let him remember. You have to kind of decide from context what the functionality is of the Jussive form. And here's an example from Numbers, and we're looking at this term here, Yigdal na. And so there, if we just had that term, we would say, let it be great, or let him be great, or may he be great. But let's take a look at it in its context. V'ata yigdal na koach Adonai ka'asher dibarta. And now, the strength of the Lord is the subject. May the strength of the Lord be great, or let the strength of the Lord be great, as you have spoken. Notice the word dibarta is a PL perfect 2MS, as you have spoken. Now, here then, that's referring back to something, and that's how we understand this phrase here. And now, may the strength of the Lord be great. And so that's kind of the text here is kind of focusing on what has been said as a way to measure this sort of prayer language of what the Lord may do. And of course, since it's speaking of the Lord, almost certainly we want to use an explicit Jussive sense here to get at that volitional sort of respectful attitude. Now we also contrast verbs, and there's both the indicative contrast negation, which we're already familiar with, using the word lo, whether with imperfect, perfect or imperfect. Here with an imperfect, and this gives us just the normal sense. This is a review, and we'll contrast this to the Jussive negation in just a moment. Here Exodus says, V'lo yishma elechem paro. Subject here is Pharaoh. Pharaoh, he will listen. He will not listen to you. So here the sense is he shall not listen, or he will not listen. Just a very indicative, straight up sort of statement about what to expect, because it's in the imperfect, so it's in the future tense, and it's kind of a conversation about what will or will not, in this case, happen, using the term lo. Now there's another negator, al, and this goes with the imperfect, and it marks it as a Jussive negative. So it's just slightly softer than lo, but still a very definite sense of negation. Now, of course, be on the lookout, because al and al sound the same. Not to be confused then with the preposition upon, but this is the al, as in that which negates the Jussive imperfect. Here's an example from Genesis 22. Vayomer al tishlach yarecha el hana'ar. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the boy. So here we have an imperfect form, tishlach, from shin lamed chet. And so if we parse this, it's going to, in this case, because it's marked, it's a Jussive marked with al, so we would say here, this is the kal Jussive 3fs, the subject being your hand, which is a feminine noun. So, may you not, or let not you stretch out your hand. But here it's definitely a command, so I think I would just translate this, do not stretch out your hand against the boy. So you'll notice here, then this is a Jussive in the third person. Now let's look at another example. Here's a phrase in Psalm 19. Al yimshalu vi. May they not have dominion over me. So here we have our perfect form, and it's in third person, masculine, plural. And if we just had that, we would say they will have dominion, or they will dominate. But we have the Jussive negator here, so here we would say Kal Jussive 3MP, and may they not have dominion over me. And again, you might say, well, why is this Jussive? Well, because this is an address to the Lord, and one doesn't tell the Lord what to do. One speaks respectfully, and so this is a way of acknowledging sort of this submission in a request, even a strong request, like we find often in the Psalms. So, while Jussive is giving this sort of volitional sense in the second person and third person, when it's in first person, we refer to this as cohortative. And there are some cohortatives marked with ah. So it's an imperfect, when you see an imperfect form with an ah ending, this is a good signal that this should be understood as a cohortative. And we use the signal words for a cohortative, let me, or let us, or may we, or let us, or something to that effect. Here's an example from one of the Psalms. Amarti eshmera derachai mechato vil shoni. I have said, let me guard my ways from sinning with my tongue. So here we see this is a perfect form, very self-consciously setting up this sort of intentionality that he's speaking of. I have said. So he doesn't just say it, he is reflecting on what he has said. And here you have this imperfect form. So this is a kal, and it's not, I would call this a cohortative, but it's 1CS. I have kept, or let me keep, I will keep, or let me keep, in the sort of the future sense here, but it's a volitional sense. Let me keep my ways. So this is sort of a prayer, and that's why it's cohortative. It's this sense of what he hopes to do. He wants to keep his ways from sinning with his tongue. So this is an example of a first-person common singular. Now let's look at a plural. Here's an example from Deuteronomy chapter 1. Vatomeru nishlacha anashim lefanenu. And you said, let us send men ahead of us. So here again we have an imperfect form marked with the cohortative ending. So we would take this as it's from the root shin lamed chet, to send, and here it's kal cohortative 1CP. Let us send, or may we send. Something to get at the volitional sense of what's going on.